Ah, £1 a week. You don't say so. I do indeed. And if we had a good run of houses, nearly double the money. Well, without more deliberation, he hastily declared it was a bargain and gave Mr. Vincent Crummles his hand upon it. So Nicholas joins the theatre and loves every second of it, as Dickens himself did. The plot then moves on, of course, and through various machinations it all sorts itself out, for further details of which you will have to come next Friday and discover at the Art Gallery at the Perpetual Halls. Tickets available at the back. There's one other little short reading I'd just like to throw in, which actually has nothing to do with the plot at all. It just suddenly pops up in the middle of the book, and it tells you all you need to know about Dickens's attitude to his very early career as a parliamentary reporter and his mistrust of all things political and politicians. Nicholas is trying to find a job, and he sees a post advertised to be a secretary to a member of Parliament. So Nicholas goes and applies directly to the MP himself. "You want to be my secretary, do you?" he said at length. I wish to be employed in that capacity, sir," replied Nicholas. "Well," said Mr. Gregsbury, "now, what can you do?" "I suppose," replied Nicholas, smiling, "that I can do what usually falls to the lot of other secretaries." "What's that?" inquired Mr. Gregsbury. "What is it?" answered Nicholas. "Ah, what is it?" retorted the member, looking shrewdly at him with his head on one side. A secretary's duties are rather difficult to define, perhaps," said Nicholas, considering. "That they include, I presume, correspondence." "Good," interposed Mr. Gregsbury. "The arrangement of papers and documents." "Very good." "Occasionally, perhaps, the writing from your dictation, and possibly, sir," said Nicholas, with a half smile, "the copying of your speech for some public journal when you have made one of more than usual importance." "Certainly," rejoined Mr. Gregsbury. "What else?" "Really," said Nicholas, after a moment's reflection, "I'm not able at this instant to recapitulate any other duty of a secretary, beyond the general one of making himself as agreeable and useful to his employer as he can, consistently with his own responsibility, and without overstepping that line of duties which he undertakes to perform, and which the designation of his office is usually understood to imply." Mr. Gregsbury looked fixedly at Nicholas for a short time, and then glancing warily round the room, said in a suppressed voice, "This is all very well, Mr. Sorry, what is your name?" "Nickleby." "This is all very well, Mr. Nickleby, and very proper, so far as it goes. So far as it goes. But it doesn't go far enough. There are other duties, Mr. Nickleby, which a secretary to a parliamentary gentleman must never lose sight of. I should require to be crammed, sir." "I beg your pardon," interposed Nicholas, doubtful whether he had heard right. "To be crammed, sir," repeated Mr. Gregsbury. "May I beg your pardon again, but if I inquire what you mean, sir?" said Nicholas. "My meaning, sir, is perfectly plain," replied Mr. Gregsbury with a solemn aspect. "My secretary would have to make himself master of the foreign policy of the world, as it is mirrored in the newspapers, to run his eye over all accounts of public meetings, all leading articles and accounts of the proceedings of public bodies, and to make notes of anything which it appeared to him might be made a point of in any little speech upon the question of some petition lying on the table, or anything else of that kind. Do you understand?" I think I do, sir," replied Nicholas. "Then," said Mr. Gregsbury, "it would be necessary for him to make himself acquainted from day to day with newspaper paragraphs on passing events, such as mysterious disappearance and supposed suicide of a potboy or anything of that sort, upon which I might found a question of the Secretary of State for the Home Department. Then he would have to copy the question, and as much as I remembered of the answer, including a little compliment about independence and good sense, and to send the manuscript in a frank to the local paper, with perhaps half a dozen lines of leader to the effect that I was always to be found in my place in Parliament and never shrunk from the responsibility and arduous duties, and so forth. You see," Nicholas bowed, Besides which, continued Mr. Gregsbury, I should expect him now and then to go through a few figures in the printed tables and to pick out a few results so that I might come out pretty well on timber duty questions and finance questions and so on. And I should like him to get up a few little arguments about the disastrous effects of a return to cash payments in a metallic currency, with a touch now and then about the exportation of bullion and the Emperor of Russia and banknotes and all that kind of thing, which is only necessary to talk fluently about because nobody understands it. You take me. I think I understand, said Nicholas. With regard to such questions as are not political, continued Mr. Gregsbury, warning, and which one can't be expected to care a curse about beyond the natural care of not allowing inferior people to be as well off as ourselves, else where are our privileges? I should wish my secretary to get together a few little flourishing speeches of a patriotic cast. For instance, if any preposterous bill were brought forward for giving poor grubbing devils of authors the rights to their own property, I should like to say that I, for one, would never consent to opposing an insurmountable bar to the diffusion of literature among the people. You understand that the creations of the pocket, being man's, might belong to one man or one family, but the creations of the brain, being God's, ought, as a matter of course, to belong to the people at large. And if I was pleasantly disposed, I should like to make a joke about posterity and say that those who wrote for posterity should be content to be rewarded of the approbation of posterity. It might take with the house and could never do me any harm, because posterity can't be expected to know anything about me or my jokes either. Do you see? I see that, replied Nicholas. You must always bear in mind, in such cases as this, where our interests are not affected, said Mr. Gregsbury, to put it very strong about the people, because it all comes out very well at election time. And you could be as funny as you liked about the authors, because I believe the greater part of them live in lodgings and are not voters anyway. This is a hasty outline of the chief things you'd be expected to do, except waiting in the lobby every night in case I forgot anything and should want fresh cramming, and now and then during debate sitting in the front row of the gallery and saying to the people about, you see that gentleman with his hand to his face, his arm twisted around the pillar? That's Mr. Gregsbury, the celebrated Mr. Gregsbury, without any other little eulogium that might strike you at the moment. And for salary, said Mr. Gregsbury, winding up with great rapidity, for he was out of breath, and for salary, I don't mind saying at once, in round numbers, to prevent any dissatisfaction, though it's more than I've been accustomed to give, 15 shillings a week, and find yourself there. With this handsome offer, Mr. Gregsbury once more threw himself back in his chair, and looked like a man who had been most profitably liberal, but is determined not to repent of it, notwithstanding. 15 shillings a week is not much, said Nicholas mildly. Not much? 15 shillings a week, not much, young man, cried Mr. Gregsbury. 15 shillings a... Pray do not suppose that I quarrel with the sum, replied Nicholas, for I am not ashamed to confess that whatever it may be in itself to me, it is a great deal. But for the duties and responsibilities, they make the recompense small, and they are so heavy that I fear to undertake them. Do you decline to undertake them? Inquired Mr. Gregsbury, with his hand on the bell rope. I fear they are too great for my powers, however good they may be, sir, replied Nicholas. This is as much as to say that you would rather not accept the place, and that you consider 15 shillings a week too little, said Mr. Gregsbury, ringing. Do you decline it, sir? I have no alternative but to, replied Nicholas. Door, Matthews, said Mr. Gregsbury, as the boy appeared. I'm sorry to have troubled you unnecessarily, sir, said Nicholas. I'm sorry you have, rejoined Mr. Gregsbury, turning his back upon him now. Door, Matthews. Good morning, sir, said Nicholas. Door, Matthews, cried Mr. Gregsbury. The boy beckoned Nicholas, and tumbling lazy downstairs before him, opened the door and ushered him into the street with a sad and pensive air. And Nicholas retraced his steps homewards. So I think you get some idea of Dickens' feeling towards politicians. So that's sort of a very quick whistle-stop tour through a couple of the great characters of Nickleby and why Dickens decided to write in the first place. Does anyone have any questions or any thoughts about anything about Charles Dickens, about Nickleby, about the forthcoming European Cup final? And anything along those lines? More than happy to. Yes?
How many of the Dickens family have been involved with language, writing, acting, etc.?
Throughout, especially the last couple of generations, Dickens's children had nothing to do with it at all. They're all terrified. My great-grandfather, Henry Fielding Dickens, was Charles's 8th child. Henry VIII. said that in America once, and wow, you're related to Henry VIII? Yeah, all right. Anyway, sorry, Henry. He became a very, very successful judge. He was a judge at the Old Bailey in London. And he was the only one of the children that really had a successful life.
Well, that was acting.
And that was acting, yeah. And that's Dickens and law is another whole different thing. Now, the next generation down, we had my grandfather, Gerald, who I'm named after. He wrote a wonderful little book. Now, let me get the title of this right. Strategies of Bombing, the Fallacy of Complete War. Very good. He was a naval admiral. He was a naval man. And he wrote this fantastic thing. But it wasn't desperately creative, let's say. Next generation down, we came to Monica Dickens, and she had an incredibly successful career with her own novels, starting with One Pair of Hands, One Pair of Feet, and then all of the Pollyfoot books and the rest of it. So she was very, very successful. Her cousin, my uncle Peter, he also wrote. He wrote, again, naval, but naval histories, and was very successful with that. And then down to my generation, obviously I'm on the stage. I have a cousin, Lucinda, who's written a few books. I'm not sure. No, it's not there. I'll tell her that. She's written a couple of biographies, one about Dickens this year, but also a lot of art history. Her field of expertise is in art. Then there have been a lot of journalists and quite a few actors and a lot of people in PR and marketing and that kind of thing. So yeah, especially this generation, it really has come through. Yeah, that was a long time ago. That question came on. Sorry about that. Yeah. Anyone else got any? Yeah.
If Dickens was alive today, what area of work would he be in? What would his career be, do you think?
Well, the same, but using a different medium.
Yes, exactly.
He would still be a communicator, he'd still be a storyteller, he'd still be desperate to highlight the issues of the day, which sadly are much the same as they were when he was writing. So he would use film, he would use blogs, he would use internet, he would use everything. And even the way he wrote in his monthly installments, it was a new way of getting the message out as quickly as possible and as constantly as possible. And when we hit upon a topic like the Yorkshire schools or the workhouses in Oliver Twist or any of the novels, he just grabbed hold of it and bashed it and wrote essays about it and wrote. So he would be doing exactly the same, but using whatever medium was available to him. It's terrifying to think what his output would be now. Sitting down and writing with a quill to do as much as he did. Now with electronics, good grief, it would be terrifying. Well, I'll be out of a job. I don't want to do that.
Well, wouldn't it? You wouldn't be here, would you?
Well, very good point. Never get into a whole sort of metaphysical. Yeah, interesting. but yeah, and probably very much involved in entertainment and theatre as well.
Maybe writing soap operas.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. In that the novels were the soap operas of their day.
Well, they do. Some of them do deal with serious social issues.
Oh, they do. They do.
Yeah.
And yeah. And you're right. The novels of the time were absolute soap opera, and people couldn't wait to get the next part. It's the wonderful story of the New Yorkers waiting for the end of the Old Curiosity Shop. After, in the previous month's installments, little Nell had coughed. And then, after coughing, she went into a churchyard to lay down. I mean, please, how much more telegraphing do you want of what's going to happen? And the American audience couldn't quite believe that Dickens was going to do this to this beautiful character, little Nell. And when the next installment was due to come in, the story is they all lined up on the dockside at New York waiting for the ship to come in. There were absolute crowds there waiting, and they couldn't wait. And even before the ship docked, somebody at the front called out to the captain of the ship, "Is little Nell dead?" And then the captain of the ship, who sadly was English, I regret to say, and without an ounce of romance in him, shouted back, "Yes!" All right then, go home. But that was the sort of passion people had for waiting for the next. And he was so clever because he would have 2 or 3 books on the go at the same time. So we're getting to the end of one plot, we're starting another one halfway through. Yeah, brilliant. There's always work going on. It was quite incredible. I had a very entrepreneurial spirit as well as a great writer. He really understood the business.
involved in him, or he would leave them alone?
Well, again, it's an interesting question, because if he was alive today, there'd be the whole copyright issue, because at the moment, they're out of copyright. There's no copyright issue, so they're easy to do, which is one of the reasons. But he would be doing them. He wouldn't give his blessing to somebody else doing them. He would be doing them. He would be there at the very centre. Even when he was alive, because these books were being published in monthly installments, people were taking his stories and putting them on stage even before the book was finished. There was one, it was Picnic Papers he did, but there was an adaptation of Pickwick and Nickleby that went on stage before he'd even finished writing the book, and he was furious about them. A, because he didn't have any control over what was happening, but B, because he wasn't getting any of the cash from it. So, yeah. So yeah, he'd be involved, definitely. Anyway, yeah.
Hi. What did you make of the recent televised Dickens? I think was it Steve?
Well, there were two of them. There was Great Expectations and Edwin Drood. Expectations I was disappointed with. It's my favourite of the Dickens novels. I love it. And they sucked every bit of humour out of it and just left the sort of dark stuff, which is a great plot line. But it needs that contrast. And it just didn't do it any favours, I didn't think. It left it rather short. Now, I've met people that have never read a Dickens novel in their life and saw it and said, what a fantastic adaptation, love that. So it was doing something right. But knowing the book, I thought it fell short. Edwin Drood, I thought they did very well. I like that. Quite a possible conclusion. That's quite likely. At the point where Dickens died writing Edwin Drood, we haven't found a body. We assume Edwin Drood has been murdered. We found his watch and his shirt pins and things in the mud of the river, and he's disappeared from the face of the earth, but we've never found a body. And we're only halfway through. We've got another half of the book to go. So the likelihood of Edwin not being dead and coming back later are quite high, I think. That's what I've always thought. So I like that. Slightly heavy on the coincidence level that Edwin happens to walk into Rochester Cathedral just at the point that the whole plot's being uncovered. But anyway, we'll skip that. I thought they did quite a nice job with that. And Edwin Drood's a great book. If you haven't read it, do. It's a really, really good half novel. So, yeah. And on the whole, the BBC did them fantastically. I mean, they know how to do Dickens. Get the stagecoach out again. We've got another Dickens. Get the criminal in there.
What about Steve Perkins? She was quite derogatory.
I didn't see it. I was away in America at the time. I heard about it. And kind of justifiably derogatory. I mean, his relationship with his family wasn't desperately impressive. But I didn't see it, so I can't really